In my last video, I talked about taking historical retired NBA players and putting them on the Eastern Conference playoff teams. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Western Conference and seeing which historical players would work best on each one of those rosters. Now, something to keep in note is this time, I'm using the lineups that I thought the teams were going to be using during the playoffs. I didn't consider at all what they've been using during the playoffs. I wanted to keep it fair and do what I was analyzing from the regular season. So, with that said, let's get to it. Now, the first team we're going to talk about is the Portland Trailblazers, the team that was supposed to spoil the Lakers' run to the finals, but we'll see how that turns out in this 3-1 lead right now as I record this. But the starting lineup for the Blazers, as I saw at that time, was Carmelo Anthony, Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, Zach Collins, and Jusuf Nurkic. Now, let's look at the offense right now, because we're going to ignore that -10 net rating. But the 117 offensive rating is incredible for this starting lineup, and a big part of it is Damian Lillard's heroics. Now, I did a video earlier about a 6-game stretch that Lillard had when he was averaging like 50 points a game. And one stat that stood out was that from beyond 30 feet, he was actually shooting 62% on 21 three-pointers. Yes, you heard me. 62% on three-pointers, 30 feet and beyond. That's absurd. Now, the second best player, I think, on this team, the second most important player is Jusuf Nurkic. His passing, his defense, he anchors this defense so well for them. He's not the most switchable big man, but he at least can stay by the rim, and he blocked a lot of shots in the return. Now, a lot of people talk about CJ McCollum being the second best player here, and I agree. He's a fantastic scorer, but I really don't see him bringing too much to the table besides his scoring. He doesn't really impact the game with his playmaking or really even his defense. So for me, it came down to either replacing Melo or Collins. Now, Carmelo Anthony is definitely past his prime. Prime Melo would certainly help this team on offense, but I need somebody that's going to give them a defensive kick. And historically, we know that big men impact the defensive end a lot more than any other position. So I ended up replacing Zach Collins with Kevin Garnett. Now, the thing about Kevin Garnett that I really want to focus on is the fact that he might be a top 5 defensive player in NBA history, ever. Full stop. I don't know if there are 5 players that have been better than him. And in today's league, he would be the absolute perfect defender because his horizontal game, his ability to step out and guard guards, was equally, well maybe not equally, but was almost as good as his ability to step back and defend the rim. Beyond his ability to defend pretty much anyone besides like Shaq, but no one could really defend Shaq, on offense, he was one of the most portable offensive players. And I've talked about portability, especially back in my Andre Kurolenko video, so you should go and check that out. But essentially, it's the ability for a player to fit into any sort of team. Kevin Garnett was a fantastic secondary passer. He was a fantastic secondary playmaker, not the guy that you necessarily want to be running your offense, but somebody that can be off to the side and complement and supplement one of the players, somebody like a Scottie Pippen. So next to guys like McCollum, Melo, Damian Lillard, Kevin Garnett wouldn't be taking efficient shots away from them. He himself would be getting efficient shots, but he would still be playmaking, helping everyone else get efficient shots and lubricating the offense, so to speak. In the 7th seed, we have the Dallas Mavericks, and their starting lineup is Tim Hardaway Jr., Seth Curry, Kristaps Porzingis, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Luka Doncic. Obviously, Luka Doncic is irreplaceable on this lineup as he led the highest offensive rated team in NBA history. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. I had a discussion about this on Twitter a couple of days ago. A big part of the reason that they flourished so much on offense is the fact that they can literally play a 5-out offense, meaning that all 5 players are able to shoot 3-pointers. You see this in other really successful offensive teams like the early 2000s Dallas Mavericks, where Dirk Nowitzki was starting at the center position. Kristaps Porzingis does the same sort of thing, except he shoots even more 3-pointers than Dirk did. Once again, like I said, I'm projecting this as if the playoffs haven't happened. So I didn't know that Porzingis was going to be out for a couple of games, and we can definitely see that they're hurting without his defensive presence. So I projected that either Dorian Finney-Smith or Tim Hardaway Jr. would be the player I take out. This is a really tough battle. If I was generally making a team, I would probably pick Dorian Finney-Smith just because of his defensive versatility, ability to spot up in the corner. But Tim Hardaway Jr. is shooting like 9 3-pointers a game at almost 40% clip. So I really wanted to keep that offensive spacing. So I decided to take out Finney-Smith and replace him with Dwayne Wade. Now, I will admit to you that this pick was really tricky, just because we know that Luka Doncic is so ball dominant. He's part of what we call a heliocentric offense, meaning that pretty much all of it revolved around him. So you're saying, Cody, why are you picking another ball dominant guard to go out there? And that's because even though the Mavericks are doing well, I don't think that this is a very inelastic offense, meaning that when he faces harder defenses in the playoffs, that it's going to be quite as dynamic. Dwayne Wade offers that dynamism. Okay, he offers maybe one of the best first steps in NBA history, one of the quickest drivers that we've ever seen. I mean, he thrived in the mid-range, but getting to the basket, forget about it. In the late 2000s-ish, he was completely unstoppable going to the rim. And if you go back to, say, the 2006 finals, you can see that on full display. Beyond that, he was maybe the best rim-protecting guard in NBA history. I would say that Michael Jordan is giving him a run for his money there, but not for Jordan. He's definitely the best. And besides that, he's a stout, tough, quick defender on the perimeter. So even though they're losing Finney Smith, they're gaining Dwayne Wade, who in himself is a fantastic defensive player. So you get this release valve of an offensive player that when you're getting so much defensive attention to the shooters and Luka Doncic, it opens up the lane so much for Wade, who is a fantastic passer and would make life easier for Doncic. So I'm sending Dwayne Wade to the Mavericks. Up next, we have the Utah Jazz with the starting lineup of Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, Joe Ingles, Royce O'Neal, and Donovan Mitchell. As you can see from the net rating, offensive rating, and defensive rating, this is an extremely successful five-man lineup, at least during the regular season. Their defense is fantastic because Gobert is essentially a defense unto himself, and Mitchell has exploded as being a main primary option for a team. I'll be very honest, I was not very high on the Jazz before starting the series. I really didn't think that Mitchell was good enough to lead an offense to like this. Maybe it's just the fact that the Nuggets defense is pretty much set up to lose against somebody like Mitchell, but still what he's been doing is absurd and extremely impressive. Since Mitchell thrives so much with the ball, I was thinking that I needed a player that could be an effective off-ball player, somebody that could shoot the lights out, that could move without the ball, that could create for everyone else on the team. Because especially, too, Gobert needs shooters around him so that he can roam around in the paint. And to me, it came down to Royce O'Neal or Joe Ingles. And I talked to my colleagues over at Premium Hoops, and they seemed pretty split on it like I did. But what I ultimately decided to do is I decided to take out Royce O'Neal and replace him with Larry Bird. Now, the thing that is often lost about Larry Bird is he wasn't this ball-dominant, dribble around, create for everyone else. I've been seeing a lot of comparisons to Luka Doncic. That couldn't be further from the truth. Larry Bird was a top 5 off-ball offensive player. He really did his best work hurling around screens, fighting for position, spotting up, things like that. Of course, when he had the ball, he was a terrific post-up player. He was able to spot up in the corner, spot up, I guess, pretty much anywhere and bury threes. I honestly think if he played now, he could probably shoot 40% while shooting 10 a game. He was that locked in. People just didn't shoot threes that much in the 80s. And of course, he was one of the best passers of all time. So he adds a lot of elements to the Jazz's game. He adds somebody else that's super clutch and super confident, and he would love to play with somebody like Mitchell, who's just going to take over when he needs to. Larry Bird loved that sort of competitiveness. So I'm sending Larry Bird to the Utah Jazz. In the 5th seed, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder with a starting lineup of Chris Paul, Danilo Gallinari, Steven Adams, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Luguentz Dort. Now, their best lineup actually has Dort on the bench and Dennis Schroeder on the court with them, running that 3-guard lineup. But Schroeder has definitely been that bench player, so I'm going to be honest to this team and keep Dort in the starting lineup. Now, Dort has been fantastic this offseason. He's showed that his defensive abilities, especially on somebody big and strong like James Harden, is invaluable right now when a team needs somebody at the point of attack. Beyond that, this lineup has been really fun to watch just because of the cast of characters out there. You have the point guard, Chris Paul, just running all the action, being as efficient as he can be at that point guard position. You have the youthful Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with his shake and bake kind of herky-jerky style of dribbling, getting to the rim, showcasing a little bit of shooting. You have Danilo Gallinari, who's just an out-of-this-world efficient shooter, fantastic in isolation, strong, big guy that can pass the ball, and Steven Adams, who's just a ridiculously strong post player whose post game is pretty solid and defensively is good enough out there. Now, even though he is personally my favorite Thunder, I ended up deciding to take out Steven Adams just because while he's a great hustler and he's strong, he's just not that go-to post guy that's going to either shut down an opposing team or get you a bunch of go-to baskets. I wanted to get an all-time post presence in there just because I'm not really sure how Chris Paul coexists with other guards. I know that James Harden and Chris Paul almost beat the Warriors a couple of years ago and going to the finals, but when you looked at some of the numbers, that Rockets team essentially did as well when one of them was on the bench and the other one was on the court, so I'm still not convinced. So what I decided to do was take out Steven Adams and put in Hakeem Olajuwon. Besides possibly Bill Russell, there's an argument that Hakeem Olajuwon is the most impactful defensive player in NBA history. Yes, you've heard that correctly, the most impactful defensive player in NBA history. His combination of speed, quickness, height, vertical was just unheard of. His starting off playing soccer in his youth really helped him with his footwork, and he was able to keep up with guards pretty well. He could sprint down the court with pretty much anyone, and at the rim, he could get well above the square with his vertical reach. This declined a little bit in the 90s when his offensive game caught up to him, but he was still essentially a defensive player of the year type caliber player. Now on offense, something that I find really interesting with him is I actually think his offensive game is really similar to Kobe Bryant's. Now, hear me out on this one. The reason I say that is because both of them thrived on taking and making very difficult shots. They weren't particularly efficient. They didn't focus on the most efficient type of shots. But when you got them into their spots, which was mostly that mid-range post type of game, they were completely unguardable. All you had to do was force them to shoot difficult shots, and they would just make them. There's nothing more beyond that. So they had what I would call inelastic games, meaning that when they faced tougher defenses, it didn't matter because they would just shoot over them. So I think in the small ball era, there would just be no answer to Hakeem down in the post. So I'm sending Hakeem Olajuwon over to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And there you have today's video where I outline the first 4 Western Conference teams and which historical player would be on each roster. Just to go through them again, the Portland Trailblazers would get Kevin Garnett, the Dallas Mavericks would get Dwayne Wade, the Utah Jazz would get Larry Bird, and the Oklahoma City Thunder would get Hakeem Olajuwon. Make sure you tune in next time for the last 4 Western Conference teams and which historical players would be on each one of those. Until then, make sure you have a good rest of your day.